And I started imagining this fairy tale. I would create only what I believed in, and which was so crazy that anyway, nobody was ever going to invest in it. I didn't want any investors. It was all about, we're going to create some incredible watchmaking, even though we know there are no clients out there for it.
Welcome to Rodeo Drive, the podcast, the show about the visionaries who keep 3 blocks in Beverly Hills at the forefront of fashion and culture. I'm Kay Monica Rose with the Rodeo Drive Committee.
And I'm Lyn Winter, your host for this episode. I'm delighted to talk today with one of the most creative people in the world of watchmaking, Maximilian Büsser. He's the founder of MB&F, Max Büsser and Friends. He describes this as an horological concept laboratory for him and a group of collaborators. MB&F has just opened a gallery on Two Rodeo Drive. Walk in and you're surrounded by kinetic art and mechanical art devices. I reached Max in Geneva and talked with him about deconstructing traditional watchmaking and finding one's true north along the way. So Max, it's an honor to have you on Rodeo Drive, the podcast. Really thrilled to be able to speak to you. I know we've planned this over a long time. Thank you so much for joining.
With great pleasure, Lyn. Thank you very much.
So I was fascinated to visit the boutique on Two Rodeo Drive. It was not at all what I had expected. And I felt like I was in a sort of beautiful lounge for a sort of private jet company that maybe I was about to take off somewhere special. So can you tell us, for our listeners, a little bit about the boutique and the experience and what you're inviting people into?
So when I started on my whole MB&F story about 20 years ago, my whole point was to create kinetic sculptures which are based on super high-end watchmaking. It was my dream, and this is what we've been doing for a better part of 20 years. And very quickly, I realized that there were not many watch retailers who actually understood what we were trying to do. So I'd show them our crazy pieces and they would go, but this is not a watch, which, by the way, I totally agreed with them. So I thought, okay, so the watch retailers don't get it. Let's go and see art galleries, because it's a work of art. So I went to art galleries, and the art galleries looked at me and said, but this is a watch. So clearly I was somewhere in the middle. And I started dreaming of a place which would curate mechanical, kinetic art, which is what we do, of all sorts of different worlds. And our very first Mad Gallery opened in Geneva in 2011. That's 13 years ago, where I suddenly, instead of only being a creator, I became also a curator. And many years later, finally, we're on Rodeo Drive with what we call the MB&F Lab.
It's fabulous. And in fact, one of the pieces that, I think connects to that idea of cities around the world is the Breakfast World sky. I was completely fascinated by that.
So Breakfast Studio are a New York-based art creative collective, and they've created this incredible work of art which you put on the wall and is actually 100% mechanical, where a whole array of tiny little discs will actually turn to do 2 things. One, there is actually a camera that you don't see, which then analyzes you, and then all these little discs turn, and suddenly mechanically you see yourself as if it was in a mirror, but it's actually not a mirror. It's all these little discs have turned, and it's fascinating to see how it works. And when that's not working, or if you're not passing in front of it, it's actually giving you the weather report with all these little discs from different parts around the US, in this case, LA. And so it's how you can actually create something mechanical, kinetic, and which is linked to your everyday life. But more importantly, I can tell you, and the greatest test of an art piece is bring a child. Kids, when they arrive in front of that, they go ballistic. And I'm for sure an adult kid, and when I'm in front of that, I'm 8 years old. So again, kudos to Breakfast, the New York team who came up with that.
You talk a lot about deconstructing traditional watchmaking. I mean, can you talk about that idea of deconstruction? I'm super interested in that.
So watchmaking pretty much saved my life. When I came out of engineering, my engineering studies, I was pretty much lost. And I'd fallen in love with mechanical watchmaking. We're talking of the late 80s. This is prehistoric ages. And the mechanical watch era was dead. It'd been laminated by Quartz in Switzerland. I'm Swiss. And so I'd fallen in love with something that nobody loved anymore. And therefore, my luck in my life is that my first job was in a beautiful brand called Jaeger-LeCoultre in 1991. It gave me a purpose. It gave me something I was good at, I was proud of. I felt finally a place where I felt comfortable. And I wanted to give back later on in life. And so when I created MB&F, it's like, how can I give back? If watchmaking is art, and I believe it's art, why do 99% of watches look more or less the same? Except if you're a watch geek like me, where I see all the different details. But most watches, you have to agree, they're pretty much the same. And I wanted to do something which would be completely different based on watchmaking. So there we go. We deconstruct traditional, beautiful high-end watchmaking and reconstruct it into a sculpture, which gives time. And so that was the beginning of MB&F, the horological machines. Then we did the legacy machines, and there were the co-creations. And for the last 20 years, I've been experimenting around this. The interesting part is that when I created the company, the brand, I only had the first design. And if you see what we've done, it was a horological machine number one.
Okay.
And if you see the first design, it has nothing to do with all the rest, because the whole point of MB&F, it's a creative lab. It's not a brand. And so what's pretty amazing is to have thought it was a very good idea to create this creative lab, knowing I didn't have half the means and only one drawing. And when I look at where we are today, 20 years later, I blown away. Yeah. It's incredible. I'm very grateful to all the people who've accompanied me over these 20 years to make these crazy ideas, dreams come true. It's been mind-boggling.
You mentioned working at Jaeger-LeCoultre, which is obviously on Rodeo Drive, but you also spent time at Harry Winston, and that was an informative time. Can you tell us a little bit about how that may have paved the way for MB&F?
I was incredibly lucky that when I entered Jaeger, we were more or less coming out of bankruptcy. And when I entered Harry Winston, we were about to go into bankruptcy. And I often say it's probably the greatest thing which happened to me, because if I had worked as a youngster in very efficient big companies, I wouldn't have learned a tenth of what I learned then. So 91 to 98, Jaeger-LeCoultre, what did I learn? Well, I deepened my love of mechanical watchmaking. I learned how to work, because when you come out of your studies, you have no idea. And I learned, more importantly, the power of working in a great team. There were no superstars at Jaeger-LeCoultre. It was just a team of very caring people who felt that this purpose, which was basically saving the company when I entered, made a difference. And we moved mountains with no money at all. It was a beautiful era. Maybe I'm becoming nostalgic with age. And so 7 incredible years at Jaeger. Then I get headhunted to take over Harry Winston's timepiece division. So Harry Winston, we all know, the very famous New York-based jeweler, who's also on Rodeo Drive, if I'm not wrong. And so we're talking 98. We're talking 25 years ago, 26 years ago. And so their watch division was a small company in Switzerland, and they were crazy enough to give me the job of taking it over. And it was in a very, very dire situation. And it took me probably a year and a half with the little team. There were 7 people who all wanted to leave because they knew that soon we were going to go into the wall. And it took me about a year and a half to stabilize the company. And then the next 5 years, 2000 to 2005, it was rock and roll. We took the company from $8 to $80 million, from 8 to 80 people in the team. We created the Opus. I think we can say we at that time put Harry Winston on the watch map. And it was an incredible formative years. And what did I discover? I discovered, I was capable of that. I come from a very simple background, middle class. My dad worked for a big company. There's no entrepreneurs around me. There are no CEOs enough. We came from, it's a simple family. I never imagined I would be in that job. So I found out I was actually capable. And even more amazing for me was the more Harry Winston was growing the timepiece division and the more successful we were, the less I was enjoying myself. Mm. And, I didn't really understand. It's not that I didn't understand. I felt guilty because when you're dealt such a hand and you actually manage to make it come to life, you should be happy and grateful. But there are lots of things happen in my life. My dad passed away, and a lot of realizations came to the fact that I'd lost myself. Mm. I had, and I'm sorry for everybody who's listening to us who get offended, I'd become a marketeer. I was a very creative kid, a very creative adult who'd become a marketeer. So I was always creating products because I thought they would sell. Mm-hmm. And that is a complete obliteration of yourself, as a creator. And I felt bad. And the other thing I realized is my parents were probably the most respectful and honorable people I've met. And but in work, in a business environment, you have to deal with a lot of not very nice people. And I'm trying to be polite. And you realize you have to invite them to lunch. You're like, why do I have to do this? Oh, because they've got power, because they've got money, because they've got influence. And I thought, if I want to be proud the last day of my life as a human being, as a creator, as even a manager, this can't go on. This just can't go on. And I started imagining this fairy tale. I was going to have my own little company where I would create only what I believed in, and which was so crazy that anyway, nobody was ever going to invest in it. I didn't want any investors. I didn't want anybody to tell me growth and profits and all that stuff. It was all about, we're going to create some incredible watchmaking, even though we know there are no clients out there for it. And that makes us even prouder because it's the contrary of being a marketeer. And the other thing was, I would like to only share the rest of my life with people who share the same value, with nice people. And that's what I set upon. And I created this brand called MB&F, Maximilian Büsser and Friends. And everybody told me this is the worst name ever for a high-end watch brand. You can't call it and Friends. I mean, that's a Mickey Mouse name. And I was like, you know what? I don't have a better one. 20 years later, everybody's telling me, oh, it's such a great name. I was like, where were you last 20 years? So, yes, that's the story which led. So Jaeger-LeCoultre, Harry Winston, realization of finding your true north. We as human beings tend to be very gregarious and follow the path of the majority. And it was about breaking free and doing what I felt was right. Mm.
I mean, it's interesting. I heard that you talked a lot about the sort of search for the why. Why would this company exist, and what's the point?
I had a very interesting moment 3 months ago. I was doing an onboarding session with some of the new people in the team because we have grown quite a lot, the team at least in the last 2 years. And so we've had 16 very tough years. The first 10 years were incredibly tough. We nearly went bankrupt a couple of times. And then after 5-6 years were just tough. And then suddenly in the last 3 years, the world suddenly has discovered us, and we have 10, 20, 50 times more clients saying, how can I get one of your pieces? So our paradigm has shifted, and we've hired a few more people in the team. And so I was doing an onboarding, telling them about the first 15 years of hardship and how difficult it was, because now you board the team and you see that everything's rosy and peachy, but it's not always been like that. And you have to understand how we're hardwired because of that. And one of the young new members, I asked, do you have any questions? He said, yes. So I went to see my grandmother the other day, and I told her, I'm so proud. I'm working in this company called MB&F. And she said, so what do they do? And he says, well, they do watches and timepieces. And the grandmother realized that they cost $200,000. And she comes from a middle-class family, and she looks at him. She's like, why? Why would you do that? There's so much other things in the world we have to solve rather than making $100,000 watches.
And why do you think people do buy them?
And we're not doing them because people buy them. That's absolutely not the reason. And I thought that he nailed it. And it's been a battle in me over the last 20 years. What's my purpose on this planet? And clearly, it's not about just creating beautiful timepieces. I got to peace with myself when I realized that we are impacting a lot of people. And first of all, the practically 60 people in our team. You know, that every single watchmaker who's joined us from 17 years ago is still working with us.
Incredible.
And so we have built a community internally and then externally. And what we realized, and it was about 3 years ago when we worked on our why, I very quickly realized the whole purpose of MB&F is to inspire people to be more creative, to take more risks, and to find their true north. If you see what we've managed to do with such little means, with such crazy ideas, with such great values, maybe you in your world, whatever it is, it will inspire you to get out of your comfort zone, take that risk you never dared, and stop following everybody and find your true north.
I mean, that is the point of art, really. It's about changing hearts and minds and creating new conversation. It's interesting you mentioned the idea of fairy tale. And you have this very modern location, the lab, but your HQ is completely the opposite. It's a very, very interesting old madhouse. So what happens in the madhouse?
So 2 years ago, because we'd grown, I realized I have to find new location. And I went to see all these open space offices that they're in Geneva. And I was getting more and more depressed. And one day I'm visiting yet another open space location. And the guy from the real estate asked me, so what do you think? And I see this old house in this greenery just next to this. And I'm like, you know what? That's what I would dream of. I don't want this boring place. And instead of telling me to go to hell because I'd lost his time, he looked at me and he said, really? I'm like, yeah, why? He said, actually, it's the same owner. And maybe there's something we can do. It's the story of my life. It's karma.
But it's also interesting that, you know, to create this sort of more home environment rather than a sort of professional, well, I'm sure it's professional, but more than an office environment, because I wonder whether one's approach to making is different in an environment that is more like a home.
And I completely discounted that up till now. I didn't realize the impact of having a beautiful house to work in. The impact is going to have not only, of course, people visiting, but more importantly on our team. And it's been absolutely incredible, the surge of energy and goodwill in the team. Not only are we proud, but honestly, all of us don't have a home as beautiful as where we work. And it's got charm. It's got history. It's the symbol, you know, no great tree exists without having great roots. A lot of people see our very innovative, creative concepts at MB&F, but they forget that it's based on horological history. It's based on vintage watchmaking, the watchmaking of the 18th and 19th century, which was mind-bogglingly beautiful. And so this house is the same thing. We're in this old house, and we've turned it upside down. I mean, it's become like this creative beehive, but the structure is vintage. And that's exactly the way we think in our watchmaking process. So it really fits. And as most of the things I do, which are very much on knee-jerk reactions, I didn't realize what I was doing when I actually signed the lease. But now I realize. I mean, life is a constant psychotherapy where you understand afterwards why you're doing something today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. My father was a watchmaker in the north of England, and he had a very, very old store that had a clock on the exterior, and in the interior of the building in the workshop were all the workings at the back of the watch that were open in the workshop. So as a child, I would go and see this huge like machine that was sort of functioning from the inside. But you in your work put that interior working on the exterior, right? Isn't that a fundamental aspect of your work?
Very much so. Again, kinetic arts, kinetic sculptures, but actually you go one step further. Till the 70s, the 1970s, watches were tools. They were what's going to give you time, mechanical watches. So it was all about having the easiest way to read the time. And if you look at the 50s and 60s watches, they're round because they usually were automatic, which makes it easier to wind up. And they had a white dial, Roman numerals, indexes, whatever, two hands, and you could read the time. But since the 70s, when quartz arrived and basically destroyed the whole point of creating mechanical watchmaking, because it's 10,000 times more precise and cheaper and more reliable, the only reason we create mechanical watchmaking is because it's a work of art. It's a sculpture. It's a piece of artisanship. It's a piece of humanity. It's painstakingly difficult to craft over years. So why would we not show what makes it so incredible? Why would we continue making it this round object with a white dial and Roman numerals where you don't see the beauty and the intricacy of its movement? So for me, not only are we going to do 3D kinetic art pieces, but we have to expose, and don't get me wrong, I am a balance wheel fetishist. So in the movement, there is what you call the balance wheel. The balance wheel is the heart. It's that with the escapement anchor is what goes tic-tac. And you virtually never see it. A very few amount of tourbillon watches, or you will see that in a very small balance wheel and the cage turning around. And for me, it's the most beautiful part. So hence in the legacy machines, why it's flying on top. And in all the horological machines, whatever you look at, it's everywhere. It's there. It's the heart beating. And you know, one step further, a watchmaker. And again, God, I'm going to make myself a lot of friends again today. A watchmaker is a bit like a god. Don't get me wrong. A watchmaker is going to painstakingly assemble 300, 400, 500, 600 components at MB&F over 2, 3, 4 weeks. It's an incredibly long process, very difficult. And at the end of those 4 weeks, he or she, we've got 3 lady watchmakers, will wind the movement up. And suddenly, after 4 weeks, ta-tum, 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 the heart starts beating. Alive. Isn't that extraordinary? That is why you become a watchmaker. That is why I love watchmaking. It's alive. And so when you give life, it's extraordinary. So there you go. Why not show all of that? That's, for me, the most important part.
You actually created this extraordinary piece called The Architect, right? With different rooms.
So in 2018, so I created the company in 2005 and set upon my whole creative process. And we really moved the needle on creativity in our industry. And in 2018, one of my very faithful, great friends and retail partners in Singapore, Michael Tay. I'm having lunch with him, and he looks at me and he says, "You're becoming a bit predictable." It's like, what? I mean, like, it's the biggest insult
Terrible.
ever. And so that sort of shook me. And I realized one of the things he was telling me is that my horological machines were very much a psychotherapy, and they were very much going back to my childhood. So they were inspired by planes because I used to make model airplanes. They're inspired by cars because I dreamt of being a car designer, by science fiction and spaceship because I was Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, which basically dates me. And so that was all my HMs, horological machines, were based on that. It was like, yawn. Dude, you've been doing this for 13, 15 years. Okay, yet another thing about your childhood. That hurt, but I have to thank him a lot. Because from there, I pivoted a lot in my creative process. And I realized, yes, it's time that I go and investigate parts of my adult passions and architecture, especially the 60s and early 70s architecture. I've absolutely loved because it was dystopian, because it was a complete breakthrough from the 50s architecture, which was, and again, let's not forget, I'm European.
It was very humanist, yeah.
Europe was razed to the ground. I mean, it was being destroyed through the Second World War. And so everything we built, all the buildings you see of the late 40s and 50s are very practical, pragmatic blocks and incredibly ugly because we just had to rebuild a whole continent. And I get that. And then suddenly, in the late 60s, we started having that trace of craziness, which we're going to really peak in the 70s, which was an extraordinary era for the whole world. And actually, you in the US, you started having much more innovation in architecture before us in Europe. John Lautner, of course.
Oh, yeah, the mid-century was...
Typically, so one of the incredible houses was Charles Haertling Brenton House in Boulder, Colorado. And I saw a photo of that, and I was blown away. It's like this organic-looking object with rooms giving onto different sides of the house. And I'm the only guy in the world who, when he sees that, says, "This looks like a really cool watch." And there you go. I go down that rabbit hole, and it's 2018, and the Architect HM11 came out end of 23, so 5 years later, because that is my cross to bear, is that when you create super high-end watchmaking, it takes between 3 to 5 years to go from idea to reality.
Yeah, and that's actually a short timeline compared to architecture, which tends to be more like 7 to 10, at least.
Absolutely.
So you almost went to Art Center College, right? In Pasadena, yeah. And what happened? You were going to come and live in LA, or you did live in California? What was happening?
No, what happened is my dream since I was 4 was to be a car designer. So from the age of 4 to the age of 18, I was drawing cars all the time. All my school notes and books were filled with car drawings all the time. And when I was 18, the Pasadena Art Center, which is the greatest car design school in the world, opened their European center in Switzerland.
Oh,
like
amazing.
20 minutes from where I lived. I told my parents, there you go, it's a sign. I'm going to go there. And my dad said, okay, how much is it going to cost? Oh, okay, that's a good question. So I asked, and the price was so humongous. And when I told my dad the price, he went white. And he said, okay, let me think about this. And I was thinking, there is no way they can afford this. Nowhere at all. My mom didn't work. He didn't have that sort of means. And he came back 10 days later and he said, we know it's your dream with your mom. We'll find the money. But I was like, there is no way. It was such an enormous amount. I said, you know what? Everybody wanted me to be an engineer because I was good at maths. And so I said, I'll go to engineering, which was in Lausanne. And it's the federal school university, and therefore it's subsidized and therefore it doesn't cost much. And my dad sighed in relief. And I thought, I'll specialize in car design after. But I never got there because I stumbled into watchmaking in the meantime, and that changed my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Car culture is obviously central to California, but also to Rodeo Drive, actually. And many of your watches seem to be designed for racing or car enthusiasts, and even some of them look like cars.
I'm a petrol head. I mean, even though I don't design the cars, and it's a good thing because I probably wouldn't have had much talent, cars are... They're my second professional love. And so clearly at some point I was going to tackle the car-inspired timepiece. But I'm not going to just slap a rubber strap and put counters which look like a car speedometer on my watches. So we create 3D concepts which are based on car design with heads-up displays and you see the engines and even the HMX. Actually, there's you've got the how do you call that, the oil caps which you can actually open. The watchmaker opens up and he lubricates the movement through where it looks like it's the oil
incredible
reservoir of the engine. So we've gone very, very, very far. And then 2 years ago, we came out with this incredible legacy machine sequential chronograph, which got the GPHD, the Grand Prix d'Horlogerie of Geneva, the Aiguille d'Or, the greatest prize in the history of watchmaking in 2022.
And was that with Stephen McDonnell, right? Stephen
McDonnell's brainchild, who's probably the only genius I've ever met in my life. I've met a lot of smart people, but he's a genius. And Stephen has, in his life, created only two movements, two calibers. He spent 5 years on our perpetual, 5 years on that sequential. And both of those movements are seminal revolutions in the history of watchmaking, where he has solved 200-year-old riddles which no one had managed to solve before that. And so the sequential chronograph is the very first chronograph where you can actually measure lap times very easily and very precisely. Now, of course, today, in 2024, if you want to measure lap times, you've got fantastic computers and you definitely don't need a mechanical watch. But that's what Stephen does. He manages to solve issues and problems which are 100 or 200 years old today. And that movement has got 585 components, which are all hand finished, was basically chosen as the greatest watch of 2022. And I, with all humility, have to agree, and I can because I didn't create it. It was Stephen McDonnell.
I was looking at the designs for the drawings for some of your watches. And what I found fascinating was that Stephen's drawings were really about technological or mathematical formula, whereas other people had focused more on the actual form and lines. And I found that quite interesting.
Stephen is, I call him a genius. First of all, you have to understand he never went to watchmaking school. He's self-taught. He has taught himself watchmaking over all these years of passion. He actually did theology at Oxford. And he, by pure passion, he has deconstructed what has happened over the last hundreds of years and found solutions. And it's incredible. Our paths crossed in 2007. He was one of the watchmakers who saved my company from my first virtual bankruptcy. And we stayed in touch. And in 2011, he had an issue, and I went to see him and said, "How can I help you?" And he said, "Well, I have an idea about a very breakthrough innovation on a perpetual calendar watch." And I said, no, we're not going to do perpetual calendars. They never work. I call them boomerangs. They come out of the workshop, they break, and they go back into the workshop. They come out again of the workshop, they go back into the workshop. And I am not going to ever do a perpetual calendar. And he just looked at me and said, "Well, there's a point. There's a reason they don't work. It's because the whole system of the perpetual calendar, the way the whole movement is constructed and engineered over the last 200 years, doesn't make any sense." And in 5 minutes, he showed me how it didn't make any sense. And he invented a whole new way of rethinking the engineering of a perpetual calendar. Sorry, I'm talking like a geek. Is a watch which gives you the right date mechanically till the year 2100.
Incredible.
Why is that? Because in 2100 there will be one extra leap year. So there's a leap year every 4 years, but there's also a new leap year every 200 years. And so till the year 2100, it gives you the right date mechanically. So it's the 28th of February, it'll go to the 1st of March, or sometimes it'll go to 29th. And he basically reinvented that movement. That, when you meet people like that, it's a rare moment where you meet people who've basically reinvented what others have been toiling for the last 200 years.
So I see in your office behind you, you have a rocket, and I'm curious about the idea of time travel and space, and whether you've actually been working at all, I don't know, with any organizations like NASA or space travel, and you know, how people keep time in space.
So I will admit, I am a total analog dinosaur. So the notion of time travel is I love romantically, but anything which goes out of my mechanical sculpture, mechanical engineering scope, everything which is tech, I don't get. Now, yes, I have got a smartphone because otherwise I couldn't live. I'm trying to convince my 11-year-old that she shouldn't have a smartphone. I don't know how that's going to work out, but
impossible.
It's really at a point where time travel, a lot of people ask me, so what would you, if you could time travel, where would you go? And for me, my life has been such a roller coaster, but in a great way. And I am at a place in my life where I never expected to be. I realized end of last year, basically, I actually was happy. I never expected to be happy. It was not something which was a goal or actually expected. I saw my dad was very unhappy in his work always. I always saw him be sad and unhappy and angry. And I was already just content with the fact that I was proud. And then I realized, wow, I'm actually also happy. And if there is one thing I would go back, if I could time travel, I would go back to have dinner with my dad. And I would tell him everything I've understood that he tried to tell me and I didn't get. And I'll tell him that I've understood that he had a different love language to mine, because his love language was to work like a dog, to send me to a good school, to have that we had a house instead of a flat. And I would have preferred to be in a flat and in a really lousy school, but then my dad would spend way more time with me, which he didn't. And he never told me I love you, and he never told me I'm proud of you. And I resented him a lot, and I told him that. And then he passed away. And we never had the time. It's only way after he passed away that I was allowed to understand what he'd done. So yeah, if I could time travel, I'd go back and tell him that, and I'd tell him I love you, because I unfortunately never did.
Oh, amazing. Well, yeah, I mean, I completely understand, actually. It's such a moving story. In the work, I was going to say to you that idea of, I think, being, happy in your work often comes from being a creative, actually being an artist. I think that, and being able to harness that is and have the courage to do it, actually. I think that the sort of boundary between home life and work life has almost disappeared, and sometimes that's a beautiful thing, particularly in a creative process, because there's just this sort of seamless life, and art becomes life and life is art, etc. So that seems to be how you're operating.
It's been my life. I remember when I met my wife and the mother of my two daughters. I was divorced, I didn't have children. And I said, look, I'm divorced without kids, but it's as if I had 3 kids. MB&F. MB&F takes as much of my bandwidth as if I had 3 children.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have to deal with that. It's part of who you can actually marry if you want to marry me. And I live my company. It's something completely normal. But then it's how do you, it's not about putting boundaries. It's actually about whatever you do it well. When I am with my family, I try to be 100% there. I don't always succeed, but it's not about just being there and thinking about work. Is if I am with them, I am there. If I am at work, I'm at work.
Yeah.
And to actually focus. And as the whole point of this whole story is to be proud the last day of my life, what do most successful entrepreneurs have in common if you read their biographies? They have one regret at the end of their life. I didn't see my kids growing up. Every single biography I've read, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So I have been trying over the last 11 years to juggle this, and I'm very, very aware of this. So no, it's not if I'm just going to throw my company away and just take care of my kids. No. But I try and juggle as efficiently as I can, knowing that there is no ideal. You do your best.
Well, I just wanted to end on a question about art and the future. So how do you think this will evolve? Who do you think the new audience is for these pieces? Do you think it's collectors? Do you think there is a young audience for analog watches, or do you think your work will move more into the idea of, sort of objects that are time-based?
So it's true that when we create, we never think if there is an audience for it. We never think there is a client for it. And for the first 16 years, it was an absolute uphill battle to then travel around the world and try and find people who resonated on our wavelength and had the means. There were a lot of people who love what we do, but there were not that many who actually could afford it. And in the last 3 years, we're just dealing with waiting lists and people saying, how do I get one of these pieces? So it's a nicer situation to be in. And it's interesting who these people are. I've discovered over the last 2 decades that the people who love MB&F are very interesting personalities. Because nobody knows what we do. I mean, very few, only the cognoscenti know what we do. It's not at all people who want to show off. So an MB&F owner is typically somebody who is very self-asserted, who doesn't care if you know what he's wearing or she's wearing, doesn't care if you know that it's expensive or not, and doesn't care if people look at him and go, why did you choose that instead of famous brand A, B, or C? And therefore, it makes for an insane community of interesting minds, of very, very interesting human beings. So if you're from Taipei, from Kuwait, from London, from LA, you end up people who've got completely different upbringings. They resonate on the same wavelength and they're the same people. And that's absolutely fascinating. And coming back to age, our client base is incredibly young. Now, of course, there is a price attached to our work, but that's why also we came up with this second line called the Mad Editions, which is only available on raffles. So we do 2 raffles a year. It's a watch which is about $3,500 instead of our usual $70,000 to $250,000. Now, it is not at all made the same way. It's an industrial product, but it's completely loony. And it's a little bit of our craziness in a much lower price point. And these raffles that because it's the best, it's the most respectful way we found, because I really hate drops and making people line up in front of stores waiting for hours. I think that's very disrespectful. So we've created these raffles where the last raffle we had 500 pieces to allocate, and 22,000 people signed up. So we initially just did 500 pieces for our friends and family, and then social media discovered it, and the world went ballistic. So we decided, okay, well, we'll do a few more every year, but we just definitely don't want it to be a business. I mean, any normal entrepreneur would jump on it and say, dude, you can do 10 times more revenue. And I'm like, we're not at all interested in that. That's not what it's all about. And so all this to say that, yes, we've got an incredibly young following. And you know why? Because younger people have dreams. And we tend to become blasé with the age. And MB&F is all about live your dreams. Do whatever you believe in. It is possible. Look at us. Look at us. It seemed totally impossible, but we managed. And so it resonates so strongly with a younger client base. It's pretty amazing, and I love it.
Fantastic. Well, that's a great place for us to end. Live your dreams. So, Max, thank you so much for joining the show. Really a pleasure to meet you. And I hope that we'll have a chance to meet in Beverly Hills when you're next visiting.
Thank you so much, Lyn. Thank you for getting this discussion flowing and making it so seamless and allowing me to go back to parts of my life I actually had forgotten, like the story about my dad, which I'm definitely not thought I was going to talk about one day. So thank you very much. And definitely Beverly Hills, I'll be there, I think, in a couple of months. And I'm looking forward to meet up then. Take care.
Thank you so much. Pleasure.
Rodeo Drive, the podcast, is presented by the Rodeo Drive Committee with the support of the Heyman family, Two Rodeo Drive, Beverly Wilshire Four Seasons Hotel, and the Beverly Hills Conference and Visitors Bureau. This episode was hosted by Lyn Winter. I'm Kay Monica Rose with the Rodeo Drive Committee. Join us on Instagram at Rodeo Drive.